Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Dear friends, sisters, brothers in God, partners in justice and peace, greetings and welcome. My name, for those who doesn't know me, is Iskandar Majlaton. I'm the local program coordinator for EAPPI and will be moderating this webinar today for the next 75 minutes. Today, we gather for a vital conversation on a day of deep historical resonance. June 5th marks an annexation, or the setback, when in 1967, Israel occupied West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. For 58 years, this occupation has deeply affected the lives of Palestinians and Israelis and continues to challenge the conscience of the global community. As churches and faith communities, we are called to remember, to speak truth, and to walk alongside those who suffer. Our theme today, accompaniment, solidarity, and joint action for justice and peace, resonates with the heart of the gospel and the prophetic call to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Accompaniment is not simply presence, it is a ministry of presence. Solidarity is not merely support, it is an act of love. And joint action is a sign of our shared commitment to peace and justice. Speakers today come from diverse backgrounds, faith-based organizations, international accompaniment, and grassroots activism. But they are united in their commitment to accompaniment, solidarity, and of course, a joint action. Our speakers will be providing their speeches for 10 minutes each, and then we will open the floor for approximately 20 minutes for answers and questions, to answer your questions. Kindly add your questions to the Q&A section in the Zoom link. And then I will be asking your questions to the speakers. So don't expect to see any answers to your questions immediately. So we begin with a speaker who will ground us in the concept of protective presence, a powerful nonviolent tool in conflict zones that mitigates violence and amplifies vulnerable communities' dignity and safety. It is with distinct pleasure that we introduce our esteemed first speaker, Mrs. Nicola Harrison, with extensive experience in the protection field from her tenure with UNRWA. Nicola currently serves as a consultant for the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, or HCHR. Her work there focuses on proactive protection within the Protection Cluster's West Bank team. Nicola will elucidate the principles and practical applications of this critical work. Nicola, microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Iskandar, and I hope you can all hear me. I'm going to just share the screen. Thank you for the thumbs up. And many, many thanks to EAPPI for convening this very important webinar today as part of the No to Annexation campaign. It's great to see such an excellent number of people attending for this important discussion. So to start off the session, I would really like to just give an overview of how the critical work of EAPPI fits into the broader humanitarian architecture of the protection response in Palestine. So these slides are just very broad, just to kind of guide everybody through. But as we all know, the humanitarian response is coordinated through a system of groups or clusters of organizations, because simply the great number of organizations that engage in humanitarian work need some organization. Now, the protection cluster is led by the UN Office for Human Rights, OHCHR, and we have some 85 active members of 150 or so members in all. So it's an enormous cluster. And there are many partners providing activities in the West Bank and Gaza to address harm. Protection, very broadly, is the set of activities that try to keep people safe from harm, where in the context of conflict or disaster, they may have been made vulnerable. So within the protection cluster, we see, very broadly speaking, that activities can be split into remedial activities that take place once harm has happened, and also preventative or proactive activities that take place in order to try to reduce harm or stop harm, ideally, in that sense. So here we are talking about violence and dispossession against the Palestinian at-risk population in the West Bank caused by Israeli state and non-state actors. So protective presence in itself is one of the core activities, of course, that EAPPI carries out in the context of the West Bank. And protective presence in itself is one of the 4 cornerstones of the proactive protection approach. Here they are, these cornerstones, and in the ideal coordinated response, we would see different organizations carrying out each of these 4 cornerstones so that they work together to build up resilience in communities prior to violence taking place. We have protection through presence and accompaniment, bottom left, and that should be carried out in collaboration with additional community self-protection activities, so supporting communities to strengthen and enhance their own very powerful homegrown activities. We know, of course, in the case of the West Bank and Gaza, so all of Palestine, that communities have experienced many decades of violence and dispossession, and therefore they are really expert at self-protection. They're some of the leaders. So, of course, holding the community central to the response. Now, in tandem, protection advocacy is the type of advocacy that would be preemptive. Advocacy that works to flag emerging protection risks, to flag issues that need immediate attention, whether that would be public advocacy or private diplomatic pressure. And this also should come hand in hand with what we call HCMD, humanitarian civil military dialogue on protection. So engaging in dialogue with the Israeli authorities through OCHA, the seat of civil military dialogue, so the UN office for the coordination of humanitarian affairs. So protective presence, as I say, is one of the absolute cornerstones to the proactive protection response. And this model of the 4 cornerstones can be applied to meet the proactive needs or the preventative protection needs of at-risk groups and communities across the West Bank. These are the most at-risk groups currently are residents of refugee camps, residents of Bedouin herding populations in their communities, agricultural village residents, residents of H2 in Hebron, East Jerusalem residents, and of course seam zone residents that are around all the way around the edge. And depending on the risk that is going on, the response will be combined, a combination of those 4 cornerstones of proactive protection. Now, just to end off here, I think it's really important to note that the protection landscape, as we all know, is changing very fast in the West Bank. There has been an enormous escalation in violence and dispossession against Palestinians in the last 4 years or so, since the incoming right-wing government of Israel has stepped up and made very clear their intention to annex the West Bank as part of their campaign. Now, what we're finding, therefore, is that the role as these steps accelerate, and particularly this year, violence accelerates a great deal against Palestinians, the need for protective presence, protection through presence, through accompaniment of at-risk groups has skyrocketed. Communities are asking on a daily basis to increase presence in their groups. And right now, the partner capacity that we have does not in any way meet the need on the ground. There is an enormous gap in terms of being able to have the agility, if you like, to respond quickly enough to support these communities. As we know, protection through presence acts not only to deter violence, but also provides a really crucial community resilience building tools of validation. I see you. I see your story. I see your fear. I feel your pain. I will tell your story. These are all absolutely essential elements to supporting communities who face violence and dispossession. And the function itself is absolutely critical. So obstacles to upscaling, here we are calling for very clearly to upscale proactive protection activities, including protective presence. And the obstacles are twofold, as it says here in the final point. One is funding. At the same time as this escalation is taking place, we have met a global funding crisis for humanitarian activity, and protection particularly is targeted as well. So we all know that we are all struggling with funding, and right now the need is absolutely critical for these to boost these proactive approaches in the case of the West Bank. So funding is one obstacle. And the second set of key obstacles to upscaling at this moment to meet these skyrocketing needs are both bureaucratic and physical access restrictions imposed by the Israeli authorities. Visas are not being issued to international staff or volunteers to enter the West Bank. Areas are being cordoned off in real-time emergency as closed military zones where volunteers and other national and international, including Israeli protected presence people, are being prevented from accessing the affected population. So we have this bureaucratic set of restrictions. We have the shrinking of civil space, civic space. We have the shrinking of the humanitarian operational field, becoming increasingly complex. And it is around all these obstacles that EAPPI and other to navigate their path forward in an attempt to continue to serve the affected population. On that note, I hope that's a sort of backdrop that we can now zoom in closer to meet some of the partners on the ground and indeed EAs and volunteers as well. So against that backdrop, reminding ourselves that funding and calling for free humanitarian access to affected populations are absolutely critical in this time. Thanks, Iskander. Back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you indeed. Our sincere gratitude to you, Nicola, for your comprehensive overview of proactive protection indeed. Your insights have provided a strong foundation for understanding this critical work. We are now privileged to hear from Mr. Anton Goodman, Director of Partnerships for Rabbis for Human Rights. Rabbis for Human Rights operates a protective presence across the West Bank, bringing Israeli and international activists to defend Palestinian farming and Sephardim communities from extremist settler violence. However, Mr. Goodman, individually or in person, brings a vital perspective, cautioning the genuine reconciliation necessitates a conscious acknowledgement of the human rights violations faced by the people. He will elaborate on the imperative for active work in defending these rights as a cornerstone for finding a way forward together. Thank you, Anton.
Thank you so much, Iskander. And Rabbis for Human Rights is very proud to be a partner organization of the EAPPI. And our partnership runs around the year, with EAs regularly joining activities and planning protective presence together. And I think that's because we have a faith-based partnership. We both come at this from a sense that this is holy work that needs to be done at this time, and that this is true to our traditions as well. Rabbis for Human Rights is an organization of 170 Israeli rabbis that has been operating since the first Intifada around 1988. And we very much support and lend our voice to this campaign of stopping the annexation, ending the occupation, and paving a path for a just peace in Palestine and Israel. None of these are just recent calls, stopping the annexation. I remember we ran a protest campaign against this in 2017. End the occupation. This is something that has been ongoing for decades. And pave a path for just peace. This is the core question in our region. But as Nicola illustrates, we're in a period where each of these has an increased urgency to it because of the terrifying times that we're living through at the moment. And Nicola began to speak about the degradation of human rights in the West Bank and the way that things are amplifying and speeding up. And as an organization, the works on the ground from the South Hebron Hills to the Northern Jordan Valley, primarily in Area C communities of the West Bank, but also in Area B as well. We are seeing violations of human rights that are unprecedented. And I know probably some people on this call have heard that being said before. I've definitely said it before, different stages of this tragic war, different period. After the first Gaza ceasefire and the Trump inauguration, there was a jump. As Nicola rightly points out, this current extremist government is what sparked the first major rise in extremist settler violence. But what we're seeing at the moment with the coordination and with the army on the ground is really an unprecedented kind of Wild West scenario where many communities are being intimidated from their land overnight almost. And we're seeing new and more efficient techniques from the settler communities and outposts that are unfortunately very effective. And so our work at the moment feels a little bit like putting out fires and not even managing to do that. And we're really mourning the communities that have been displaced. And a week and a half ago, that was Mariah Deir, which is in the South Jordan Valley, a community of about 150 people. And we saw a new technique of settler violence there, of settlers setting up an outpost actually within the community's living area. We've seen this happen as well in in the South Hebron Hills. There was an attempt of it in Ras El Ain, which is close to Jericho. And it's really, it shows the coordination between the authorities and the settlers that they can be so bold as to set up outposts within Palestinian communities and then embark on 24/7 intimidation campaigns. This is highly worrying because we're seeing people being displaced. This is a crime against humanity. In fact, if you go to the West Bank today with the Declaration of Human Rights, you will see a violation of almost every article within your first 20 minutes of being with the Palestinian community. And for Rabbis for Human Rights, as a faith-based organization, and we have rabbis from across the different traditions and streams of Judaism, this is a heresy and affront to our Judaism. For many of us, this is an affront to our Israeli identity, who never believed that the situation could get this bad. But primarily, it's an affront to a Jewish identity that hasn't encountered extremism really in its midst in the last 2,000 years. And suddenly we see extremism in our people and in our religion. And this is something that we need to work on deeply internally within Jewish society and within Israel as well, to achieve public pressure against this extremism, to de-radicalize the corners of society that have become so violent. And it's also very important for us to be on the ground. And so our methodology at this time is to provide as many opportunities as possible for Israelis, Jews, international activists to come to the ground and to take part in protective presence or in a workday with the Palestinian community that's suffering extremist settler violence. And this, we hope, will both radiate outwards and have some impact in helping the Palestinian community who are suffering the human rights violations, and will also, radiate backwards to Jewish Israeli society, where people will go back as advocates, as ambassadors, as voices against the human rights violations, against the occupation, and definitely against the annexation. The sad truth is that on the ground, we see a de facto annexation happening while we're talking. The plans of the most extremist settlers are very well coordinated and are strategized, and they're succeeding as well. And so while the political level might be providing the support for it by saying that they'll be bringing it into law, while they're talking about it, it's happening in practice. And so this campaign is exceptionally important. For us, it's important for Israelis to come out and talk about it and get into the Israeli media. And there's been a number of items over the last couple of weeks that have been satisfactory to see that the Israeli media started reporting more on Israelis, on foreign activists who are protecting Palestinian communities. This is important, and the numbers need to grow. One of the ways we try to raise the numbers is to provide opportunities to do protective presence that are lower barrier and that are safer, maybe, than a protective presence of just a couple of people in one of the hottest spots. And so what we do is we gather many people together, busloads of activists, often on Fridays and at peak times during the year. And together we do a work day with the Palestinian community. This also gives the opportunity for the group to hear the Palestinian partners talk about their daily reality and to hear their voices. And that's very powerful. It also gives an opportunity for a Palestinian community to host Jewish and Israeli activists in the community. It's very meaningful for both sides. It's trying to bring some of our intention into creation. And so one of our main actions is the olive harvest. And Albin, if you can play behind me just a slide of photos, I'd like to just present this for a couple of minutes. Thank you. So over the olive harvest and in fact the planting season, we run events almost every day of the week where we bring people to the ground, work with different communities, and try and get an understanding of what's happening. There's actually a range of photos. I see this one. This is some of our humanitarian aid that we do. Here, this is a day in the Bethlehem region. As you can see, there's people of different faiths there, clearly visible faith leaders, Jewish and Christian and Muslim, coming together to try and do something on the ground. This is a group, in fact, of just rabbis. Everyone in that photo is a rabbi. And the idea here is to also have a positive experience where people can feel, that maybe we're in a bubble of sanity at a time of war when everything around us seems to be falling to pieces, and just the terrible, unnecessary loss of life that we're seeing around us. Our hearts are shaking and breaking at this time. It's so multi-layered, from the 56 hostages who are still in Gaza, and the fact that our government is doing its damnedest not to get them out and maybe to kill them, and the sheer loss of life and residency in Gaza is leaves you mute. And then the use of the weaponization of humanitarian aid and food, basic food supplies to Gaza. And on top of this, you see the plans for the, if you stop the slides, it would be good, because I see that it's a whole mixture from I thought this was a different slideshow I sent you. My apologies. As you can see, we do a lot of activities. In those photos were also our Interfaith March, and which ran just 2 weeks ago in Jerusalem, Interfaith March for Human Rights and Peace. We're trying to connect this all together. Currently, at the moment, the protest movement in Israel is growing, in protest of how the government is running this war and not prioritizing the hostages, protest movement against the corruption in this government and its extremism, and protest movement about the occupation. And so we go to these protests and we hand out flyers and invite people to come and take part in protective presence in the West Bank. And when they do, it's quite likely that they meet someone from the EAPPI and together start having conversations that can maybe build this camp and create some solutions on the ground. Thank you, Iskander.
Thank you indeed. Our sincere gratitude to Anton specifically, and to Rabbis for Human Rights. We are really proud of this strategic relationship, because it is really one way to supporting the people on the ground. Yeah, well, I'm also really thankful for your presentation, because it was a thought-provoking presentation from my perception, and for underscoring the critical link between active human rights defense and genuine reconciliation. However, it is now our distinct pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Abu Hisham. Abu Hisham is a highly respected human rights expert and dedicated field worker. With over 2 decades of experience, he has been an unwavering and instrumental supporter of our program and for the communities we serve, always standing ready to provide essential support without hesitation. I know many of you in the attendance will recognize Abu Hisham and appreciate the depth of his commitment. Abu Hisham, please.
Thank you, dear Iskandar. It's definitely a pleasure to be with such a wonderful, wonderful group of people that I've always admired, and I've always put them in a very high place of respect. Thank you for your kind words, and we try as much as possible to actually to keep up to that standard that you have placed us at. You know, from the work that we have been doing going on for the past 20 years plus, definitely you can put a very high importance on the work of protective presence in general, and specifically our colleagues from the EAPPI, where I have the honor of dealing with for that period, ever since that they've started back in I think 2002, 2003. So I just actually would want to, first of all, to highlight the importance of that work, and specifically what my colleague Nicola have actually said from the issue of validation, is that it is very, very important for the Palestinians on the ground to actually to know that their agony and their suffering is not going in vain, that there are witnesses to the agony that they're going through. Now, we definitely would agree that such a presence is not going to be the solution for the problem, or that they are going to actually to provide protection in terms of physical protection for the Palestinian communities, but rather having to actually to have that person next to you as a witness to what is taking place, and even as a carrier of the voice. Now, we know that all of our colleagues from the EAPPI will actually have to go home after 3 months, and the Palestinians, I think that they will see them as carrying their voice, the voice of the Palestinians, back to the countries where the EAs are from. So that gives a sense of that, again, our suffering is not going in vain, and somebody is actually caring, and maybe my agony down the road will actually trickle and actually cause some more movement on the international level towards having to have my rights realized. So, and I have to say that actually I've seen hands-on on a number of countries that where the EAs actually go back to their countries, and this is where the real advocacy starts, which is very much appreciated, I would have to say. People on the ground might not know this, but I think I have to clarify that the role that is being played by the EAs back home is actually very crucial for the survival of the Palestinian cause, to be honest. And we know, as probably you guys know, that once you are here on the ground, you will be hit with what I call the Palestine virus, in which that it's a life-changing experience, and the EAs will tend, for the most part, either coming back in one form or the other, either through the EAPPI program or some other forms, or that they actually wanting to come back. There's always that desire to actually to come back to see and affect the injustices that are taking place here on the ground. And for that, we're very, this is something to be honored. People that are leaving their families, their life for 3 years initially, for 3 months, sorry, to come and stay with the Palestinians, to kind of be a witness and try to help as much as possible. This is something to be admired, and this is something to be honored. And from our part here on the ground, I cannot claim that we are part of any kind of a bigger organization that can provide protection or even meet the needs of the communities, but we know of other organizations that are very willing to use the input coming in from the EAs and other protective presence actors to actually to kind of use that information in a way to kind of provide for the community. In my personal point of view, it's very, very essential that these communities that are at the brink of the occupation, that they will get something tangible. We can actually go there. We can actually provide protective presence. We can actually start to talk about them on webinars or even when we go back home. But the personal belief that I have is that these communities will also have to have some materialistic assistance in order for them to kind of to continue to have that presence on the ground. So advocacy in its own right by itself should be complemented with some sort of a directed assistance to these communities in order for them to be able to stand and have sumud on their lands. We continue to actually to play that part, that be a connection between the incoming EAs or the incoming protective presence in general and the communities on the ground, specifically in the South Urban Hills, in Bethlehem area, in the south of the West Bank. I just have to also, before I finish, to highlight that the presence of these internationals there is highly, highly respected and is highly, highly needed, especially these days. I know at least there's one call from the South Urban Hills to increase, protective presence players, specifically when it comes down to the issue of Khalat al-Daba', which again, like our colleague have mentioned, that settlers are actually now establishing tents and outposts right very, very close to the community. Susia is facing that right now. We're facing that in Khalat al-Daba' as well as in al-Khair, where these tents will be used as a headquarters from which that harassment and violence by these settlers against the communities do take place. And unfortunately, the settlers have been, successful in a number of localities here in the south of the West Bank, that they've managed using these tactics to actually throw Palestinians out of their communities. And despite the presence of the Israeli police, despite the presence of orders from the court for these communities to go back, but nevertheless, once they try to go back, then the settlers will force them out once again. So the situation is dire. More protective presence is needed, and definitely you will find us on the ground having to facilitate to the best of our ability the mission of protective presence. Thank you.
Thank you so much indeed. Just a comment regarding Khalat al-Daba'. Khalat al-Daba' unfortunately was announced as a military area since last week, immediately after a diplomatic mission visit. There were 40 diplomats and UN members, high-ranked members from the UN that visited that community last week on Wednesday, and immediately after, less than 48 hours, it was announced as a military area and nobody is allowed to get there. They are fighting to get water into that village. Anyway, I really am very thankful and grateful for you, Abu Sham, for sharing your invaluable expertise and for your decades of unwavering dedication as a human rights expert and field worker. We now transition to a third presentation from two of our ecumenical accompaniers who have recently concluded their service in the West Bank, offering us their valuable first-hand perspective. It is a distinct honor of ours to introduce Ida Wien, Ida holds a master's in Middle Eastern Studies and has extensively worked across the region and is a dedicated person for justice and human rights from a young age. And Mr. Knut Ostby, hope that I mentioned your family name right, who is a seasoned UN leader with over 33 years of experience in development, human rights, humanitarian affairs across 17 countries. He has also served as a UN resident and humanitarian coordinator and UNDP resident representative in challenging contexts like Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Iran. We warmly welcome both of you to share your perspective and insights. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Iskandar. And thanks to all of the rest of you for the great work you're doing for the cause. It's always inspirational to hear. I would like to just mention a few things from my experience as an EA. I recently came from Bethlehem after being there in 3 months. And what I saw and what I experienced was the massive structural occupational efforts that made life very impossible for the Palestinians living in the West Bank. And also in 3 months, how much is escalating? Now we talk about annexation. So what I saw was the daily limitations of the people living there. Like we were living behind the wall, and you can't even imagine that Jerusalem is just on the other side, but it's closed by a big wall, and people line up every morning to go through the checkpoints. And at one point, when it comes to this about international presence, you can ask yourself a lot of questions. Does it do anything? But for the people there, I really was honored to be greeted in such a kind way, always. And even people having some critical question, even if you could talk and say to people, you know what, I'd rather be here than not being here. Then you even got access to wider information, and people really respected that. And Nicola, you also mentioned something about the effect of being seen and heard. And this, for all people in the world, we need to be seen and heard as human beings to thrive. And for people in the Palestinians in the West Bank, which are now like the limitation of journalists having access to the West Bank. I mean, when we come and we see and we hear, we can feel that people really need to tell their stories, because the cruelty of what's going on every day in people's life, I think it's unbelievable if you come outside. Even I studied the region for more than 25 years. I was shocked by the amounts of cruelty and violence we saw every day. Just like setting yourself in a car, it was impossible not to see. Like all the road barriers coming every day. I think it escalated with more than 100 new road barriers in that period we were there. So it's now close to 900. And some of the village was shut down. So people couldn't get access to their land, or they couldn't get access to their family. An ambulance couldn't pass out of the village to get to the hospital. People were giving birth. And we saw all kinds of levels of cruelty, that like big things, like the attack of the refugee camps. And people are sometimes, this is not normality. Even the big things I saw, even the wild things I see sometimes the small details that cannot be normal. It's like small children seeing soldiers every day when they come to school. They have the military jeeps coming, throwing tear gas at little girls with balloons in their hands. It's indescribable. And what we can do is like jump out of the car and show we're there before they come. And we see that sometimes it does make a difference, and that's what the statistics say. So it's more than ever important for international people to be present in the West Bank. The situation is terrible, and we need to get more funding to have people there, because people really need it. And we're not heroes. The Palestinians living in this every day, they are the true heroes, and they have a patience and resilience that I admire. So I think when I compare my efforts to what I came, I think I was the one taking more home than what I could give, because these people are amazing. And I want to tell a little thing about when we go around, when you see this psychosocial effects of being seen and heard as like all children needs. And usually we came out and we talked to a lot of grown-ups about, settlers have been attacking their houses, stealing their sheep, and even like evicting people from their houses, like people were like kicked out of their houses and physically attacked and were forced to leave. And then suddenly when it got quiet, I saw some of the children, they were like, like sitting there. And when you gave space to them, they had so much to tell, even like the small story of something that is not normal. And they saw that I can tell it to a stranger because the stranger might see how normal it is, because in the society, this is what happens every day. And telling it to someone else, it's I could see that this girl, when she told about an episode, she got a new football with her friend and they were playing in the street, and then the soldiers came and said, you can't be here, you have to move. And this is just like a tiny thing, but for us this can never be normal and it can never be accepted. And this is what we have to do a lot more advocacy about, because it's all the detail of the cruelty. It lines up to piles and piles of reporting, but also the support that is needed on the ground is bigger than that. So I felt I really what I could contribute with being solidarity, showing sort of solidarity, and I think that is always like. Some of the what you call the humanitarian effort that is needed on the ground on top of all other things. And when I tell people when I come home, it becomes bigger. It takes a long time, but we need to keep on. And now I see there's a lot of movement going on. I think the annexation and what's going on, it's just escalating in a very rapid speed. And but what I hope is that the international community now, it starts to feel like it's speaking a little bit up. So it needs to speed up, and we need to keep our voices clear and loud and call for action and more joint action. So thank you. Knut, you have...
Thank you. Let me jump right into it because time is short. Anton, you said that de facto annexation is still going on, and I think all us accompaniers, we did see that very clearly, see that just when stepping in there. I would like to spend most of my time referring to one particular incident, which I think highlights many of the aspects that we talk about. This was on the 7th of March in a place called Ras Al Auja, and not so far from Jericho. We worked in the Jordan Valley, and the really extraordinary aspect there was that it was so coordinated and so well planned. There was the police, the army, and 200 settlers together that descended on a community of Bedouins. It happened in the middle of the night. The police closed the nearby roads so that nearby villages could not come for assistance. The army stood guard so that there could be no physical defense put against these settlers who entered into the community. And they entered into all the sheep shelters and also into some houses. And they stole during the night 1,500 sheep, all the sheep that belonged to this community. They were brought over to a neighboring valley. We have spoken a number of times to this community afterwards, and they know where the sheep are, but they cannot go and take them back because then they will be accused of stealing sheep. There is no access to justice in this case. There's also the use of the deprivation of livelihoods as a part of a displacement mechanism. This was in the middle of the season where the people get most income from their sheep, lambs, milk, etc. They had taken up loans, which they now cannot pay back. We spoke to a sheep owner whose two sons had to drop out of their higher education and take odd jobs in the neighborhood to help pay back these debts. His wife had been diagnosed with cancer, they cannot pursue this treatment because of the lack of money. There was a Deutsche Welle team that investigated this. You can find this video online, and they also went with the community and found the sheep where they are now, and confirmed it's impossible for them to get them back. This resonated throughout other communities of the Jordan Valley, and we spoke to many communities that are now afraid. They're worried. They're talking about how can we move somewhere. Perhaps we need to sell our stock before it's stolen. And this is just one out of thousands of incidents that are taking place and are part of a larger, both a structured campaign for strategic taking over of the land, and also an impunity for rogue elements at the local level who commit crimes, who commit violence, harassment, etc., and cannot be taken to justice. And this all comes together to deprive the population of the access to livelihoods, sometimes to health services, education, justice, other commercial activities, and in the end of a home. We can maybe close with a question about, because this is not, this has been going on for many years. I think it's appropriate to ask, how many times will the Palestinians be thrown out of their homeland? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much indeed. Yeah. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time. We want to thank you for all what you have said, because it is quite painful, and unfortunately even the tears has dried sometimes in our eyes. I want to add to the pain that you've seen and mentioned, a call from one of our attendees. He's a well-respected person by the program. He's from Gaza, and we are very happy that he is able to be here with us in this occasion, with this at this webinar. However, he has a call to every one of us and the attendees. He says, we are starving, we need food. People are dying because there is no food and no water. Please pressure your governments, do whatever you can to get us at least this minimum help for our dignity. He also just mentioned another story about the Baptist hospital being bombed this morning, and 3 journalists being assassinated. Yeah, they stay pretty close to that hospital, at the church, and what remains from their homes, and they are really in a very difficult situation. I want to thank you all for bearing with me, but right now I will open the floor for questions and answers. First question we received was for Nicola. What do the communities you work with in the protection cluster expect most from the international community? Is there any possibility anymore for dialogue with the military in this context?
Thank you, Iskander. So there's 2 parts to the question. What do the communities expect? And secondly, is there an opportunity for dialogue? I'll start with the easier one, which is the second part. Now, dialogue channels historically have been well established between OCHA, the seat of civil-military dialogue, with the Israeli authorities. However, unfortunately, in the last few years, these channels have broken down. Now, in terms of access, so movement of staff and humanitarian goods around the West Bank, there remain channels for dialogue open. But in terms of protection, for rights protection and physical protection of Palestinians, in at-risk areas or just anywhere, those channels are no longer functioning. There are individual organizations that have at times a channel, but the systematic centralized system that we would expect in a humanitarian setting is not currently functioning. So that's something extremely important to highlight because as one of the cornerstones, it becomes very difficult without clear dialogue on protection to properly support. In terms of the first question, I mean, there isn't one answer. Of course, there are many, many communities across the West Bank who are extremely experienced in facing violence and dispossession. And now with the escalation that's going on, there are many communities that are being newly exposed because the protection risks are spreading out beyond the historic hotspots. So there are many communities with different expectations. Those who have had more experience of violence understand what to expect in terms of preemptive protection and also protection response and the broader humanitarian response, of course. Whereas some communities are new and have less clear understanding of the system. Communities are exhausted. There is an enormous amount of fatigue in communities facing violence, and this, of course, is not helped by seeing the lack of leverage that the international community has over the Israeli authorities with regards to Gaza. When we see so many people being killed, it is hard for communities in the West Bank to expect that they will really be protected. I hope that goes some way to answer.
Thank you so much. I know the question wasn't that easy. Yeah. The second question is for Anton. How can people sign up to join the Rise for Human Rights activities? That is the first part of the question. And the second part is that there have been some pretty worrying polls of Israeli public opinion in Haaretz recently, saying 82% support Palestinians being expelled from Gaza. Do you know if Israelis hold similar views about the West Bank? And how accurate is it?
Thanks, Iskander. So I'll throw my email in the chat for anyone who wants to join, and please do. And I can link you into our WhatsApp group or our other online tools so you can see what activities we're doing in the coming month. The second question is a very big question that occupies our thoughts. I mean, there's been such a hardening, a radicalization of attitudes within Israel at this time of war. And that's, to be honest, that's to be expected. Societies at time of war often radicalize in their opinions, become more homogeneous in the way that they think, have less critical thinking and less ability to empathize or to be compassionate, and lose some of their humanity. We see this at times of war. And yes, there's this recent poll about the expelling of Palestinians from Gaza, and we should remember at this time that the key world leaders, from Trump to our own government, have exposed this plan of ethnic cleansing of Gaza as if it's relevant. And you see the Israeli public has responded as if this is a legitimate response. It really illustrates the extent to which Israelis do not have a plan and do not have a vision for the future here. The extent that infects what is happening on the West Bank is actually very, very high, okay? Because we've seen over the period of the war a real move both in the attitudes of police and of the army in terms of how they see the extremist settlers who are doing the violence, the way in which they are supporting it, and often now joining it. And this leads to, I mean, it's quite surreal experiences of. I was in the West Bank a couple of weeks ago, and we were attacked by extremist settlers, and I called the police, and I filed a police complaint. And unfortunately, as usually happens, the army arrives before the police, and the army is very clearly aligned with the extremist settlers. Immediately, they're asking for all of our IDs, not the settlers, and smoking cigarettes with them while they're investigating us. And I'm the one who placed the complaint. I have the police complaint number on my name because we have been physically attacked. And by the time the police arrive, the situation is often a lost cause. And in this case, it ended with our Palestinian staff being arbitrarily detained for a couple of hours, being blindfolded with their hands zip tied behind their backs in a jeep and being kicked around. This is a complete erosion of a rule of law. Now, the occupation is don't get me wrong, is a human rights abuse from the beginning. But that we have seen over time, there's really military or police being more responsible as a duty bearer for certain Palestinian rights. I will not say that they've been outstanding in that at any point. They've been more of a problem. But what we're seeing today is a complete erosion of that. That the army is a human rights abuser, not just standing on the side. So where a few months ago, a year ago, we would see that the problem was the army is standing on the side watching violent settlers attack Palestinians. Now what we see is the army coming back, like in Jibna in the South Hebron Hills, where the whole village was attacked at night by dozens of soldiers who joined violent settlers. And when we appeal to the army as how can this be? And the army says clearly this was not in the chain of command. And their response was to keep the soldiers in the base over the weekend as a punishment, which is not a suitable punishment. Sends a very clear message that you can get away with breaking the chain of command and just decide that you're going to attack a whole community. And so, yes, these attitudes have infiltrated key roles in society. And we're seeing this at the very highest level, unfortunately, as well. The new head of the Shabak, the Internal Secret Service in Israel, is an army general, Zinni, who is known for his messianic attitudes and also a follower of a rabbi called Tao, who is highly extreme on his opinions and nationalist. And so we're seeing at the highest level an infiltration here. As everyone seems to be saying on this call, we're in a period of acceleration, not in a period where we talk about, how we're going to solve all of the conflict and sit around the table and shake hands on a solution. We're seeing a growth in violence and human rights abuses, and we need to think about how we can put on the brakes rather than how we can solve the whole conflict at the moment. So it's a roundabout way of answering, Iskander.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you indeed. A couple of questions also for Abu Hitham. Abu Hitham, you experience a lot of dramatic situations firsthand. What gives you hope in these dark times? This is the first part of the question. The second part, can you share an example of resilience or steadfastness, sumud, from one of the communities that you are active in?
Thanks for that question. I'll start with the second question. When it comes down to the resilience, it's actually we are bringing that from the people themselves. I can recall one specific incident that I don't know if you guys are following, with this about 75-year-old man who is from the hamlet called the Rakiz, who was shot by a settler, and then they have to amputate his leg. As well as when his son came up to protect him, a 15-year-old, he was also detained and was taken to the police, and he had to pay a fine before he was released. The man, the one who was shot in the leg, was transferred to an Israeli hospital, and there he was treated not as an injured man, but as a suspect of attacking the settler who shot him. So in the hospital, he was actually chained to his hospital bed while they were operating on his leg and removed it. So this guy is with and the very next day, the settler came in and put some fence around his land. So he lost his land, he lost his leg, he lost his son actually lost his freedom for a while, and especially a 15-year-old to be put in prison. It was a very dramatic incident for him. But at the same time, when he was released from the hospital, they made an interview with him in the ambulance, and this guy was absolutely laughing. He was, the steadfastness in his, the way that he was thinking about it, that we are saying this is our land. They are not going. These guys are coming in from such far lands. I was born here. This is my land. My leg actually ended up going to the heavens before me. So be it. I'm going to return. I'm going to be staying in there, and nothing is going to remove me out of my land. So that sense of the people themselves, they are actually the one who will give us power in order for us to stand by them, because they are steadfast. They are there. They usually would want to stay. Having to actually have a conversation with somebody is good enough for them to kind of realize that they are humans as others. So that is the element that actually push us as people who are in, let's say, in a better educational, financial situation, to be able to actually to stand by these guys. So it is, stories such as these that actually is pushing us. This is what gives us actually hope. And also what gives us hope is actually kind of the thinking that you can do something about it. The can-do attitude is not only, with all due respect, with advocacy and bringing diplomats and all of these things, very much needed. I'm not reducing the importance of that, but actually having to wake up in the morning and say, we are going to do this for this community, and being able to do that kind of small success stories will be able to allow you to continue what we're doing, to have the impact on the ground, not in theory, but also in action.
Thank you so much, Abu Itham. Actually, Saeed's story is an inspiring one, even for us. Thank you. Ida, and when you returned back home, and each one will have to answer this question separately. When you returned back home after serving as EAs, how have your stories about what you experienced been received by your community, friends, family, political leaders? We need to hear from you, your experience. What feedback you received?
Well, the feedback is that I feel that the story, when you are close, like we are human beings, and what we react to if things get close, people understand them more. You can watch the news and you can have a distance, but if someone tells you a story from someone who's been a place, it's much more effectful. So that's why we have to keep on telling the stories. And the reaction has been like, some people think it's hard to listen to, but I can't hold back when I speak. So it's like, now I'm in Greece, I talk to all the people I meet, and you know what, the Greek is the society. I'm on an island, and people here, they're really supportive, and people know. So that's something else that changed during the Gaza. When the first 1.5 years, it's been like a really hard discussion to take with people. You led a lot of resistance. But now people know more about the Palestinian cause because people are walking in our streets. So it's now, I feel it's easier to talk about the experience from the West Bank, but the people have no clue what's going on in the West Bank. They know now about Gaza, but they don't really know enough about the West Bank. They have no idea, actually. So I think that's the thing, that the level of the speed of the annexation, it goes together with what Gaza is going on, because then they can continue on the West Bank. So it's important to keep on talking about it, because that's the real information that can be led mouth to mouth and to a bigger audience in different ways.
I find, from my side, I find some of the same things. People now have heard a lot about Gaza. People know shockingly little about what's happening in the West Bank. People, maybe I make some speech, I tell people about this, or they could not imagine that these kind of things would be going on. And for me, who've been there, it's hard to fathom that the lack of knowledge is so enormous. And also the lack of knowledge that it is so closed, that it is so much deprivation of opportunities or of space for the Palestinians. This is not known. I just have to agree with Ida. We need much more knowledge among people, among politicians, and But many people do know, and they choose not to pay attention to it. They choose not to take action on what they know, and that is, of course, worse. There needs to be justice for the Palestinians, and it will require more people and more governments to step up. You mentioned educated Palestinians, which we spoke to, Ida, that we are coming under criticism of why are countries supporting Israel in conducting these injustices. Why are they not doing something to support the Palestinians? And we found ourselves without an answer to this. There is some political action, but there needs to be a lot more.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
And also, I like to keep it very basic when I talk to people who doesn't know a lot. I keep it very simple. If you were there, you would think the same. And it's very basic because it boils down to human rights. Is it for all or is it for none? I mean, I think you like it, so everyone should have it. And that's all what the Palestinians are asking us for. They just want justice. They want the right to live. They want the right to their house. They want the right to exist and to thrive. Like all other people, we are so connected. It's the same needs that goes everywhere. And they're not asking a lot. They're asking for the same as we have. So it's very simple in a way. It's not an attitude question at all, actually. It's just about humanity.
Very well said. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Now, we have a couple of reflections that we received from a couple of our former EAs. And one last question that we will be able to take and was forwarded to me. However, what we received from EA Bill says, I was an EA in 2022 South Hebron Hills and again in East Jerusalem 2023. I witnessed a home demolition in Wadi Qaddoum, where a young lady named Dunya expressed her sincere gratitude for us being there. She said that we are both from wealthy countries, Sweden and Canada at the time, and that we could be anywhere in the world right now, but we chose to be there with them. During their time of need, she wanted us to know how much it meant to them to know that they are not alone. Her only request was that when we go back to our home countries, we tell them what life is like for them under occupation. The second note came from EA Anne, and she says, as a former EA, please be assured of our solidarity. We will not stop our advocacy, action, and prayers while the injustice continues. Yeah. Then the last question is for me, what can we do to support this work if we are not able to be there on the ground? Honestly, use the material that we produce, send us your questions, tell us what information you need. There is a huge lot of information under this campaign, but at the end, we can really provide you with talking points. We can support you with the asks that you need to provide. But what we need really is noise. We need to continue to make noise for the occupation. We shouldn't let them go away with it. This is at least from my perspective. We should continue to make noise. I want to thank everyone of you. I just want to close this webinar, thanking everyone. And I want again to express heartfelt thanks to our speakers, Nicola, Anton, Abu Hisham, Ida, Knut, for sharing your insights, witness, and vision. I also need to remind everyone of our attendees and thank them all for being here with us. Of the campaign, WCC EAPPI Stop Annexation and End the Occupation campaign, paving the pace for a just peace. We encourage you to actively contribute to the success of this campaign and use the material that was produced by many dedicated, committed colleagues from ours around the world, around the globe, from more than 20 countries. Your voices have shown us how accompaniment is not only about being present, but about standing in principled solidarity, how joint action across borders, faith, and communities can challenge systems of oppression and create spaces for hope and resistance. As we mark the solemn anniversary of the occupation of 1967, let us not only remember but respond. Let us continue to pray, advocate, accompany, and act, trusting that even the smallest act of love and justice is part of God's larger work of reconciliation. In the spirit of the one who calls us to be peacemakers, let us leave this space renewed in our commitment and united in our hope. Until we meet again, shukran, toda, thank you, and take care.